All right, so just to warn you, um, you might hear some things that are controversial tonight. I know that's unusual, but I don't make this stuff up. It actually is biblical, so just FYI. And we're going to be talking about sex and marriage tonight and the nature of the marital relationship, biblically speaking, and all of that. So, you know, some of these things might actually kind of hit a particular way. You may, but we're going to talk about that and why they hit a particular way. So anyway, all that to say, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We're going to be reading verses 1 through 9.
Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but because of temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion.
Okay. Self-explanatory. So we're done. Something has happened in our culture that you may be unaware of, and it's that marriage has been redefined, but not when you think it was. People think that marriage has been redefined recently with the whole homosexual thing of what could be a marriage and whatnot. But actually, I'm going to submit to you that American culture redefined marriage 100 years ago when it started to see marriage as simply a partnership of two equal parties that were agreeing to live together for various reasons and not necessarily a specific one. Biblical marriage still exists, but it may not actually exist as much as you think it does. And I'm going to actually have you think about the question whether most Americans today actually are even married in a biblical sense. So let's go down this line of reason and I'll show you why it's different than what the Bible considers marriage. What is the marriage covenant in the Bible? What is it? When you agree to marry someone else, what are you doing? What's the point of it? Okay, you're agreeing to raise children together. True. Why? It is creational, that's true.
Join as one flesh.
Yes, that's happening.
Are you able to ask that question without engendering the pronouns? Like, can you just say, why are you getting married? Because isn't the answer a little bit different?
We are going to talk about that.
Okay.
But I want to first generically ask what is the purpose of marriage and what agreement is being made? And is it the agreement that you made when you got married in modern America? Is that what you were thinking that marriage is?
Well, I think it's because you're going to be intimate together under the umbrella of Christ, and not be doing that outside of marriage as a sin.
Right, and that's true. But why is that? Yes, that is true. This is all true. You guys have the right answers all around. You're all right.
According to the text we just read, to decrease the temptation of sexual sin.
Great. So Maria's actually on it, except in the Greek, it doesn't say temptation to sexual sin. It says because of sexual immoralities, plural. So in other words, because of various types of sexual immorality, which is what, according to what we talked about last time? What is sexual immorality? So yeah, anything anti-creational, bestiality, incest, homosexuality, or just adulteries, whatever it may be, like just this sort of non-procreational sexuality.
Would you throw lust into that too?
No, because lust can serve a creational activity or whatever. Now, lust outside the bounds, yeah. Because of that, Paul wants you to get married. Now, if sexual immorality, if porneia means sex outside of marriage, then all he's saying is, yeah, get married so you have sex inside of marriage. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But as we saw last time, he probably means more than that, because remember, the whole case that he was dealing with was a man had his father's wife. So he's actually talking about non-procreational sexual activity. So the solution to that is if you need to have sex, don't have sexual activity that's non-procreative, get married, because the assumption is that within marriage you're making a contract that we're going to actually allow God to bring children through us, because you're ultimately perpetuating the line of the husband, and so being fruitful and multiplying and filling up the earth. You are extending the life of the husband in that way. Now, based on the purpose of marriage, this is what a marriage contract is in the Bible. It's based on the suzerain vassal treaty that we see throughout the Bible. Does anybody know what a suzerain vassal treaty? We've talked about it before. What is that? What's a suzerain? Yeah, it's like a king is the guy in power. He's the strong party in the covenant. What's the vassal? That's the weaker party that needs protection. So if you think of like Nebuchadnezzar, he's the suzerain, and he comes along to Jerusalem and says, hey, I will protect you. And of course, it's kind of like a mafia type thing. It's like, I'll protect you for myself as well. If you pay tribute. So you'll submit to us, and that covenant is a suzerain vassal treaty. You'll submit to us, and we'll protect you. So if anybody messes with you, we'll protect you. That treaty is described as one of love and submission. You will love the suzerain, and he will love you. And in your love of him, you will submit to him. So the covenant is, you're saying to the suzerain, if you protect me, I will submit to you. And the suzerain says to the vassal, if you will submit to me, I will protect you. That's what a marriage covenant is. It is a man saying to a woman, if you will submit to me, I will protect and provide for you. And the woman is saying, if you will protect and provide for me, I will submit to you. Turn into Exodus chapter 21. And I want to show you what the man has to bring to the marriage covenant. This is the covenant he's making with the woman. Now, this is a slave law, but in it we can actually see what is required for the man to provide for the woman. Starting in verse 7. If a man sells his daughter as a slave, she is not to go free as male servants do. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. Now here's the law. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and sexual rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, she is to go free without any payment of money. In other words, he has divorced the woman, and he doesn't get to keep her as a slave. Since she was a wife, he has divorced her and she's free to go. So divorcing her is a failure to actually provide food, clothing, which basically I would say represents shelter, and sexual rights. Those three things. That is what the man brings to the woman. This is what I will provide for you. It's that protection, along with sexual rights in the marriage. What does the woman bring to the marriage? What is her part of the covenant? You'd be shocked how many, both are providing children, right? Well, you'd be shocked how many women are asked that question. They're like, me? And it's like, imagine if the guy were to answer that way. It's like, what are you bringing in this marriage? Like, what do you mean, me? I mean, you're getting this. What is the woman bringing to the marriage? What's her part of the covenant? What's she actually saying? Okay, I'm going to marry you. What does that mean? Because obviously it means something more than I'm just going to live with you. In our culture, what are people meaning at all? Because frankly, people have sex outside of marriage all the time. They're just dating. So what is marriage? They move in together, and that's not marriage. So what is the difference? Now, in our culture, I would say there isn't really much of one, and that's the problem, because people don't understand what marriage is. What does the woman bring in the biblical marriage? What does she bring? Is she bringing protection of the man?
Sexual.
No? Well, we'll talk about it in a minute. Don't jump the gun. Is she providing for the man? Food and shelter? No. So what is she essentially bringing? Well, he can be honored by anybody, though.
Fruitful.
I mean, explicit, like, in other words, exclusively her in the relationship is bringing this to the man.
An heir. An heir.
Well, that would be the result, right? Well, what's the helpmate doing?
Just say sex.
Are you just saying nothing?
Just say sex.
Conjugal rights.
Child rearing.
Yeah, out of the things that we just mentioned, which one does she bring?
Okay, immediately. Sex.
Right. She brings one thing. He brings a bunch of things for protection and provision. She brings one thing.
But a few days later, it could be a baby.
Yes, of course. Well, that's the goal, right? That's the whole. So, and we'll talk about that in a minute, how it's not just sex, it's also sex with the hope of children. What is it? Well, here's the thing, like, you can have servants that bring you breakfast, right? So that's the issue. What can the wife give you that no one else is supposed to be giving you? And likewise, the man is the one who's supposed to be, but he's not supposed to, though. He's supposed to marry them if he does that. In the Old Testament, he's supposed to marry them if he does that. And what is exclusively, the man is exclusively to give to the woman. Obviously, other people might be able to provide for her, but other people can't give her all three. All three are provided only from the man. It is an exclusive relationship in that regard. Now, I want you to go back to 1 Corinthians 7.
So where does the modern marriage, that sounds like today's marriage, right? I protect, provide, you provide that seems,
It sounds like modern marriage for, I think, some people, but what I would ask people is, what's the difference between that and then people shacking up in our culture? And I would say it looks very similar.
He doesn't have to provide his responsibilities to her. So like when they shack up, he's not going to protect her. He doesn't provide for her. He doesn't do all the. So he's getting what she offers, but she isn't getting what he is supposed to be offering her.
Yeah.
That protection, because he could leave her. He just doesn't care.
Right.
There's no contract. There's nothing there.
Right. And so because there's not a contract there, should he have rights to her and should she have rights to him? So it's actually an illegal, in the eyes of God, union because, in fact, it's a fake marriage. This is why it's actually a crime in the eyes of God to do such a thing. It's a crime in the eyes of God. And if that's even more committal than if you were dating and you're having sex. That's even worse. Because at least the guy who's living with you is probably paying at least half the bills. But if he's not living with you, then sex outside of marriage is even worse. Because now she's giving you her part of what she should actually get in a marriage relationship. And you're getting that from her. But she's not actually getting the protection and provision and all of that you're supposed to commit to her for life.
I want to anticipate an objection, and if you don't want to answer it now, if you can answer it later, then that's fine.
Yeah.
Maybe even not a total objection, but the pushback might come. I see that the Caesarean vassal approach is a good metaphor, or a good place to start.
It's not a metaphor.
It's
It literally, it's the framework. It literally is the actual covenant.
Yeah, so you might say, like, I see that as a valid framework. I see Genesis 2 as a valid framework. But shouldn't our grounding framework be Christ in the church? Shouldn't we start with Christ in the church and then answer these questions and see, like, the Caesarean vassal treaty framework as, like, subservient to Christ in the church?
Right. What kind of covenant is the covenant between Christ and the church? Caesarean vassal treaty. What kind of covenant is Deuteronomy with God and Israel? Caesarean vassal treaty. It's all a Caesarean vassal treaty. That's why you have the phrase that Christ is to love. Christ loves the church, and so the man's to love the woman. The woman's to submit to the man as the church submits to Christ. It's love and submission. It's put in that framework because it's a Caesarean vassal treaty. That's what kind of covenant it is. Christ is saying, look, if you will give your loyalty to me, I will protect you from death and hell. He is the ultimate husband. And so we are his bride for that reason. And so the church submits to him and gives their loyalty to him for that reason.
Is this a good time to talk about the vassal?
Sure. Well, yeah. What specifically? What?
Well, I mean, over many years since the Enlightenment, it's a very hard thing for even in Christian circles for women to think that they are the weaker and that they need a man.
Right.
And so, as you read your Bible, and hopefully as you're in a Christian church that's teaching, I mean, not very many Christian churches actually teach this.
Right.
But as you read your Bible, hopefully you're starting to see these things unfold. It's a really hard thing, I think, for many women because they don't understand how they could be weaker because our culture and our government even has provided all access to everything a man has also for women. So it's really difficult to, in these days and with electronics and like modern things in our lives to say, oh yeah, I need a man.
Yeah, I mean, with guns and fertility clinics and all sorts of things, you don't think you need the man anymore. And this is how feminism, I think, is destroyed. Notice how all of that works to then destroy the marriage. Because if you don't need a marriage, you don't need a man, there's no point. Why would you marry? And if girls are just going to give it away for free, why are men marrying girls? That's exactly why they marry in the first place. That I'm going to have this girl here, but if she's just going to give her sexuality to me anyway, what's the purpose of marriage? And if you wipe out the purpose as being having children and raising up covenant children within the context of God's design in Genesis 1 and 2, then again, marriage is useless, which is why so many secular guys now are like, I'm not going to get married. Why would I get married? So a woman can divorce me and take half my stuff? So you see that they don't understand what this is for. The reason why the Christian needs to still marry is because it represents Jesus in the church, and it's a command of God to have these things within the framework of marriage and not apart from it. And so their sexuality is to be displayed within marriage and not outside of it.
And our government has worked to destroy marriages
Yeah.
too. When they came in and said, hey, we're going to give money to unmarried women,
Right.
And that destroyed a lot of families.
Yeah, it really is interesting because people are actually incentivized to divorce. They're incentivized, like the women are incentivized to get the children from the man. And we know that when a man's out of the household, that's the worst possible household you're going to get. It is I think I've said this to some of you before, statistically, when it comes to households where people are more on drugs or they are thrown into prison or whatever, the household that has no father and the household that has no parents at all, they're pretty much about the same. The statistics are skyrocketed. People are going to end up in jail. They're going to end up with drugs, sexual promiscuity, all that sort of thing. The household that doesn't have the mother but has a father has the same chance that a household that has both the father and mother in it. Did you know that? The father is the key. And when you incentivize to take the children away from the father, you inevitably ruin not only the marriage and the children, but you end up ruining society. It actually is, it makes no sense for our culture to do it, but I would appeal to you and say that the reason why our culture does it is for the same reason that when the Pharaoh's soldiers saw the waves coming up and crashing down on them, they ran into the waves, not away from them. A demonically controlled culture, it runs into the waves. It's suicidal. It destroys itself.
So it makes me think of, been listening a lot about women pastors and how we're making men inferior to the women. They are the provider, they're the money maker, and all that
Yeah.
falls into all of this too, and how the man and the woman are perceived in our culture.
Yeah. Well, the sad thing is that as much as this is supposed to empower women, it leaves women completely unprotected and used. Because again, most of our culture is going this way. They're going to see, look, I don't want to get married anymore. So men are going to be like, I don't want to get married. It only benefits the woman, doesn't benefit me. And they can just use the woman up, and then when they're done with her, they pass on to another woman, and they don't have to worry about it. This is a raw deal for the women. And yet it's supposedly a better culture because it's feminist and whatnot. So anyway, back to the text, because I want to relate all this to what we're talking about. Now, concerning the matters about which you wrote, so this is a question they wrote to Paul. They were asking him about this. It is good for a man not to touch a woman is actually what it says in the Greek. Not to touch a woman. Now, obviously, it's talking about sexual touch. It's not saying you can't kiss your mom or something or whatever, right? It's talking about sexual relations, so some of your translations will translate it that way. But because of sexual immoralities, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. I don't want to run over that language. It's very important. In the Greek, the idea of his own and her own is exclusivity. Meaning, a man is to have his own wife, meaning that no other man has her. But then it also says a woman is to have her own husband, meaning no other woman has him. So in case some people are trying to make the argument for polygamy today. If you turn on YouTube, it's like men are supposed to be polygamous and all that sort of thing. Does this allow for polygamy? Now, how could it? A woman is to have her own husband. He's exclusive to her. She doesn't have any other, or he doesn't have any other wife. No one else owns him. I'm just flipping through. There's stuff that comes up all the time. It's all these gender chats between different groups or whatever. It's a Utah thing. Well, one of them, the couple of guys who do these gender shows or whatever are Muslims, and so of course they're trying to argue for polygamy and whatnot. And then you get Christians trying to adopt that, and it's like, nah, that doesn't work biblically. And then I want you to notice verse 3. The husband, and in the Greek, I don't know how yours translates it, but it actually is talking about the husband has to give, he needs to give his covenantal rights to the woman. It's actually the word for obligation, to pay a price that he's obligated to pay. to the woman, and likewise the woman to her man, her husband. What's the obligated rights?
Protect, provide.
Clothing and food.
Well, in the context, it's not protect, provide. Actually, in the context, it's specifically that one right. Sex. And if that's not clear, then we're going to see right in the next verse. Why? Because the wife does not have authority. She doesn't have rights over her own body. That's right there, that statement is completely the opposite of our modern culture, which the woman has complete rights over her own body. But then he says this as well. But the husband does. The husband has rights over her body. Likewise, though, the husband does not have rights, authority over his own body, but the wife does. The ownership, what you have done in marriage, as you have said, my body is now for you. You have authority over it. And I have authority over yours. That's the contract. The contract is I have authority over your body. You have authority over mine. You don't get to give your body away to someone else. It is exclusively the person you marry, and that's it. Does not belong to anyone else. Now, when you have a suzerain vassal treaty in the covenant, there are periods of time that you reaffirm the covenant. You reaffirm your loyalty to one another. And what I would argue that Paul is arguing here is that you're reaffirming your covenant when you are sexually intimate with one another, when you give your bodies to one another. Before you're married, you should have a wall around yourself, right? You're a castle and you should have a wall that actually prevents anyone else to be having any sort of sexual relations with you. You have that wall. When you get married, that wall is no longer around you as an individual. It should be a wall that's around you as a couple. And unfortunately today, many people, when they get married, they still view themselves as single individuals with a wall around them, even toward their spouse. There are no off limits, biblically speaking. Obviously, I'm not talking about abuse. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But there are no off limits to your body from your spouse. That's probably the most radical thing I'm going to say tonight. Because I guarantee that even many of you here still think that there are. And you treat your spouse as though there are. And this is 50-50. When I counsel people, sometimes the man has a lower libido than the woman, and he's depriving his wife from sexual relations. And the other 50% of the time, the woman has the lower libido, and she's depriving her husband of having sexual relations. And what I want to convey to you is that if marriage is a suzerain vassal treaty, a covenant, when you convey disloyalty, when you actually say, I'm not going to provide you with what I told you I would in the covenant, you're actually conveying, then therefore I'm breaking the covenant. You don't have to say to your spouse, I would like to divorce you. You're saying it when you deny them sexual relationship with you. I want to make that very clear. I don't care what fuzzy words you use. You're breaking the marriage covenant when you refuse to submit your body that you gave to your spouse to them. If you want to make your marriage strong, it's going to be here. Because I promise you, what happens in the bedroom, it flows out to the rest of your family life. It flows out to the rest of your relationship. I guarantee it. Even if you think it isn't, it is. It's destroying the rest of your relationship. You cannot have a good marital relationship if that was not put in place, a good sexual relationship in your marriage. It's not going to happen. You might have a good friendship. That's nice. You might be great roommates. You might be great buddies and you like watching the game together. That's great. That's not a marriage. You've broken the covenant. And it's really important that we understand that. Now, I realize by saying that the spouse has total rights over your body and you have total rights over your spouse's body, that immediately feminism has placed within our culture you to be alarmed by the statement because, oh no, if you say that, people will abuse it. Oh no, think of all the people who are going to abuse that. I want you to think for a minute, how many other things are you alarmed about and refuse to actually engage in and believe and submit to because you're alarmed by an abuse of it? People abuse food. Have you stopped eating? Anybody here stop eating because people abuse food? People abuse driving. Did everyone walk here today? People abuse everything. But you're not alarmed about someone saying, you should drive a car. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You know how many people got in wrecks today? You know how many people don't know how to drive? Don't tell people to drive. That's irresponsible. You know how people like overeat or are gluttonous? It's like, whoa, whoa, are you telling people they should eat? That is just irresponsible. How dare you? And yet, when I teach the scripture that is given by the Holy Spirit of God that says your body belongs totally to your husband and his body belongs totally to you as the wife, whoa, 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 whoa. You don't have any idea how many people are going to be abusive of that? How dare you? That's irresponsible. But I want you to see that that trigger is there and not on anything else because feminism has put it into our culture. Why are you confused? Why are you concerned about an abuse of this thing, but not the other billion things that are abused?
But that means the woman could abuse it too, right? If you're going to argue that it's an abuse.
Yeah, but women can abuse in our culture. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, they're allowed to do whatever they want.
I guess I would say that women probably abuse it more than men do. Because they withhold sex when they're upset.
It's a power thing.
Yeah, it becomes a manipulation tool.
Yeah. I agree. I think that men do as well, though. I mean, I would be surprised. I think you guys would be surprised that it actually does go both ways. And so it's really important to understand that Paul's actually saying, you don't have the right to do that. You're sinning against God and the covenant you made with your husband, and God is the backer of your covenants. You realize the covenants that you make, it's upon the pain of death that you fulfill them. God is the avenger of people who don't have fulfilled covenants. So this is really important to understand. You're reaffirming your covenant and your loyalty when you are giving your body to your spouse, and you are actually breaking your covenant when you refuse to. Now, let's put that in a further context of the fact of Ephesians 5 says that you're to submit to your husband. That actually means also I would say primarily even in your sexuality. You submit that to your husband. But we also learn from Ephesians 5, the husband is to love his wife. So that means that even though the other spouse's body is yours, if the person's sick, you're not going to make them submit to you in that moment. If the person is overwhelmed and exhausted or tired or whatever, you're not going to do that. You're not going to harm them in some way. You're not going to abuse their body. You're not going to do that because you're commanded as part of the covenant to love your spouse as well. That takes care of the abuse portion. You're not to abuse it. Scripture's really clear. Obviously, it's God's will that you have relations with your spouse in a non-abusive manner. But it shouldn't be through manipulation. It shouldn't be used as some sort of bargaining chip. And let me warn you, especially for the ladies, don't turn your husband into a beggar. That's going to make things worse. Because are you going to be attracted to some guy who like is under your power because he just wants to have sex with you? Are you going to be attracted to a guy who's a beggar, like asking for it, or a guy who has to somehow like convince you to sleep with him? Probably not. By the way, if he has to convince you to sleep with him by going out on numerous dates with you and buying you flowers all the time and all that sort of thing, which is frankly, in my mind, a type of coercion that is used in dating because there's not a real covenant there, and so the guy has to use something else to try to convince you to bring that wall down. If the guy has to do that in marriage, what's the difference between your marriage and dating again? Yeah, nothing. If the guy has to coerce you in marriage through dating and flowers and talking, whatever it may be, whatever your rules are for letting the wall go down, you're still in a mentality that you're dating your husband. In reality, that wall should be down already. There should be no wall that he has to bring down.
It almost seems like a form of prostitution if you have to be paid for it.
Well, yeah. Well, I would argue that dating is prostitution, and if you're sexually active, yeah. I don't know what the difference would be.
I like your analogy of the walls, and I think it might be helpful to think about that analogy, but how it works today in our society, which would be walls, but there's gates there. And those gates start to open at an earlier and earlier age in our society, and they're open emotionally.
Yeah.
So emotions is the only thing that can open or close the gate. And then when people get married, now they kind of put a bigger wall around the two individual castles. Each individual castle still has a gate that opens and closes based on emotion.
Right.
And increasingly, the outer wall has a gate too that can also open and close in different ways,
Right.
i.e., pornography or worse. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's never just a wall anymore without a gate, right?
Right.
Like it used to be, you have a wall with no gate until you're married, and then your walls are combined, and you're in the same wall. There's only one wall.
Yeah.
But now we're trying to open our spouse's gate, right? And if that doesn't work, then we go and open the gate in the outer wall and find fulfillment elsewhere.
Yeah.
Affair, emotional affair, whatever, right? And there's not a concept of a impenetrable wall anymore.
Right.
It's always able to be breached with emotions our entire life. And that's the way it is in dating and then in marriage.
Yeah, do you guys remember the last line of Song of Solomon? It's her brothers talking about her, and they say of her, if she's been a door, then basically the idea is she should be shamed and wiped out or whatever. But if she's been a wall, then she should be praised. Talking about her virginity, that door was not open to other people. It was saved for her spouse. She was a wall to everyone else. But to her spouse, she'll now be open. That's a similar concept. Now, speaking of the Song of Solomon, if so much of your covenant is this, and it hinges on how you treat this in your marriage, who should initiate this?
What do you mean? Who should initiate?
Who should initiate the reaffirmation of the covenant physically?
Us?
Well, I said speaking of Song of Solomon, who initiates it in Song of Solomon?
Both people.
Yeah, both. Both parties. Did someone say both already?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just came out of the.
Okay, yeah, it is. Both people. There is this idea, and actually Brent and I were talking about this earlier. I actually think this comes from feminism. The idea that the man initiates. Now, at first, that seems like a very macho thing, right? Like the man initiates. And I do think initially that's true. I think a man should probably initiate a relationship first. That seems right to me in terms of covenant and all that sort of thing. But in terms of the sexuality, I actually don't think that's true. I think both should initiate, as you see in the Song of Solomon, because it actually confirms that both want to remain in the covenant and both want to reaffirm the covenant. I think feminism introduced the idea that it should be the man only who does it, because guess what happens when only the man reaffirms he wants to be in the covenant? The woman then inherently is saying, or implicitly is saying to the man, I don't want to be in this.
I think Esther, the book of Esther, points a beautiful picture of this. Recognizing, of course, that the king is pagan, he still is a picture of God and the man, and so he calls Queen Vashti, right, to come, and she refuses.
Right.
Right, and that's death, right? That's breaking the covenant.
Yeah.
And then obviously he can call Esther, right? But then Esther flips it on its head and shows that she also initiates.
Right.
She comes into his presence and he holds out the scepter to her. So again, just another place that dual initiation is seen.
Yeah.
And so, so we have to be careful as women and men, both of us, and that all brings into our attire and how we dress ourselves and how we behave,
Yeah.
because we're devoted to our spouse in that way. And so if we're attracting other men, and men are attracting other women, behavior and their dress and everything, and that covenant, again, is being broken, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there are many ways to convey basically that, I don't want to be in this. I'm divorcing you. You don't have to say the words. People they get so caught up on, well, I didn't go downtown and secure a divorce, and it's like that's a modern understanding of marriage. Like, this is the biblical understanding. Verse 5, do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come back together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Does that sound like they're barely being intimate? It's just, doing the bare minimum? Or does it sound like that they're actually intimate pretty much all the time to where they have to set apart a time to go pray? It's like, if you're barely having sex anyway, then do you really need to set apart a time to go pray? You have lots of time to go pray. But it sounds like you're being physically intimate together when you're together most of the time. And then you're, for part of the time, setting apart time for prayer. So that's really important. And so when Paul says, look, so that Satan may not tempt you, he's not saying make sure you have sex once a year so that Satan doesn't, tempt your spouse. He's actually saying what's going to actually help your spouse in that area is having lots of physical intimacy with you, lots of it. That will provide a protective barrier for you, because I don't know about you, but when I go to the grocery store and I haven't eaten all day, I want everything in the aisle. It's like, oh, Spam, I hate the taste of this, but now I actually like it. I mean, just everything. You want everything when you're hungry. When you're full and you go to the grocery store, you want almost nothing. You're just buying whatever you have to buy, and that's it. Sex works the same way. When you're full and you go out, there might be pretty girls, but you just don't have a taste for any of that. You're already full up. When you're deprived, when you don't have that, now you go out and every pretty girl looks prettier. That's the problem. Be really careful. You actually, as Brent said earlier, even though the woman is not bringing physical protection, like she's going to beat somebody up for you, she is protecting you from the devil himself. And so both of you are doing that. The man providing for the woman, because believe it or not, I know we've said it before, but a lot of people don't understand. Women are tempted in this area. It's crazy, but they actually do lust as well. They are tempted to actually commit adultery. They are tempted by pornography. They are tempted by these same things. And you men provide a protection for them by being intimate with your wives. In the same way, you wives provide a protection for your husbands by being intimate with them a lot, not a little. Now, I said last time, your ultimate protection is going to be Jesus Christ. It's going to be wanting to have fellowship, have that dinner with him, that intimate relationship with Christ. But there is another protection over it to where actually it can fight off even temptation. Christ can fight off, the sin, but you'll have a temptation there. Your wife, your husband can fight off the actual temptation to where you're not even tempted. So it's important that we understand that. Now, if you don't care, or you care more about yourself than you do your spouse, you need to understand you're feeding your spouse to the devil. This is really important to get. Your spouse can only have you. No one else, as we just saw. No one else. You are the only person that can protect your spouse in this way. They are relying on you to protect them. And if you don't care, or you just feel, I feel too pressured, or whatever it may be, I don't know what the excuse might be. I'm tired, I got a headache, whatever it may be. I don't know what it would be. But ultimately, you need to understand you are betraying your spouse. There's no other way to say it. They have relied on you for protection. And you're like, nah. And feminism, once again, has taught us, at least from the man's part, that the man is just manipulating you to get sex. That's why he's talking to you about it. So when a man comes to you and is like, you know what, I really need your protection here, it's like, oh, well, that's just you're just trying to manipulate me into bed. If he's a Christian man, I guarantee he's trying to tell you, I need you, please help. Don't dismiss him. Again, feminism has been ingrained in us to think, the man, he's just trying to manipulate you. He's trying to get power over you. He's just wanted to use you, all that sort of thing. If he just wanted to use you, he wouldn't have married you. He can use 500,000 other women who will give it away for free. He wanted to marry you because before God and you, he wants to do what's right. So do what's right to him as well. I say the same thing to you men. Protect your wives. Your wives are going to be tempted if you don't. It's never foolproof, but whenever I see someone with a damaged marriage, or there's an adultery that's committed, often it's not just like one person that created that situation. Often it's both people. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just one person. But often it's two. And what's interesting is regardless whether it's a man or a woman, they'll create these marriages that are sexless, where the person is lonely, they're deprived, and then finally he or she just cracks, and they sin, and they go out and commit adultery, and they get all the blame. Those horrible, horrible people. And no one ever sees all of the unfaithfulness that was committed by the other spouse in marriage, by depriving their spouse. I'm just saying, as Christians, we need to do better than this. As Christians, we need to be faithful from day one of our marriages to protecting our spouses in every way that we can. Now, I've said before, sexual intimacy is not just physical, right? You're pair bonding through it. There are emotions that are had. We call it making love for a reason. It's making feelings for the other person. Your body releases chemicals that do that. And so it can be nothing but good for your marriage, as long as you aren't doing anything abusive. And so I appeal to you, like if you're out of the mindset, you just feel like, I just don't want to do that anymore or whatever, your mind is pretty moldable. It can be molded by the way that you think. Mold it back. Make yourself once again desire, because you actually can. It's not something that happens to you. You can actually cause yourself to desire again. And I would submit to you that you should have been your entire marriage honing your mind to desire only your spouse. But if you've not been doing that, do it now. Go back and do it now, because that was your covenant. That's what you promised before God and man.
You're talking about the union that's made. You're talking about the chemicals and love, right? And,
Yeah.
And so So when you practice sex outside of marriage, you're still establishing those connections.
Right.
You're still bonding physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally,
Right.
but only really for the purpose of tearing those bonds, right? Like,
Well, you're doing it in an evil way. You're doing it with someone who you did not have that covenant relationship with. You're betraying God and your spouse.
right, but it's serial, right? Like it's you do this over and over. It's not like dating isn't just about one relationship and then they get married. It's over and over and over with multiple people, multiple partners.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about, when you date, you mean?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just kind of the reality in marriage that these are good bonds. They're meant to be there. They're meant to be established, and they're not meant to be broken. But then our culture practices them and breaks them and breaks them and breaks them.
Yeah.
To the point where you just go numb, where you actually stop caring, and you've conditioned yourself for divorce
Yeah.
more than marriage.
Well, we talked about this last time, but ultimately you only have a certain opportunity to pair bond, especially women. Men are more so. Here's a crazy statistic. If a man sleeps with 18 women, his ability to pair bond is severely reduced. And he may not be able to pair bond anymore, frankly, after that, 18 women. How many men do you think a woman has to sleep with to diminish her pair bonding to the same degree? What is it?
Fewer than 5.
Yeah, one. It's only one.
That is technically fewer than 5.
Fewer than 1,000.
Yeah, $1, Bob.
But either way, pair bonding is reduced. And so, yeah, we talked last time about how basically you're giving away what belongs to your husband, what belongs to your wife by doing this. And so, again, people in our culture, sex is like shaking somebody's hand. It's no big deal, and they don't get it. The Bible has these things in it for a reason. It's meant to protect the marriage relationship, ultimately because the purpose of God is for you to be fruitful and multiply, that your children be protected, that you have covenant children, and this is meant to protect them. When your marriage is strong, it protects the children. When your marriage is not, it weakens them.
Could you maybe expound a little bit more on verse 5? I mean, once we get what you're talking about right,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in all my years of like being in I like never hear this part of it talked about in terms of is this a command that people should do? What should it look
Yeah.
like when they do this, specifically like length of time and what should that look like? I mean, I get that if you're like having sex once a year, like fix that first before you wade into verse 5. But okay, after you've got that going, I don't know anyone who does this, so I'm just wondering if you could talk more about it.
Well, I would argue that the person who's being deprived is the person who actually needs the protection and is being denied, or that's being reduced or something, so that they're no longer protected. So I would actually say it probably looks different for individuals in terms of libido, but you would have to talk that over with your spouse. But I do think Paul's saying, to the greatest degree, that's what you need to actually share yourself with. So in other words, whoever has the larger libido.
You misunderstood the question. I'm talking
Okay.
about the fasting part.
Oh, got you. Well, it's not fasting; it's prayer.
Sure. Okay.
You mean fasting in terms of you're just not having sex during the time? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So I just never heard this really talked about, taught. I haven't asked a lot of people, but I don't really know anyone who does it. I'm under the impression that almost no one does it. So if you were going to, I would call it fasting, whatever.
Well, I don't know who actually spends this amount of time having sexual relations so that you would have to break. Like, to where it would be viewed as fasting.
It's interesting if you would just view it then from the standpoint of the time that it takes to perform the act versus the attention and focus, or maybe in some ways of thinking worship.
Right, all of that.
That is directed into preparing for the act, and then the worship that can be taken away from that and given to God. Um, what is that? Maybe I'm coming at it from an already unorthodox position, but I just like to hear you expand on what the
Yeah, so
might look like.
I think he's talking about Satan tempting and the two things, using the two weapons that you have against it, which is sexual relations with your spouse and prayer. So I think it's actually to combat the temptation of the devil. I don't think it's talking about prayer as like how you set up sex or something, or anything like that. I don't think it's against that. But I think he's just basically saying that, look, you're going to be tempted. Here are the two things that you're going to need. You're going to need to be with one another, and you're going to need prayer. And so if you're needing prayer, you need to stop the one thing so that you can be devoted and not distracted by the other thing while you actually have prayer, in order to combat the temptations of the devil.
We did that. I mean, we've done this before in our marriages. I know, Jesse, you must have, and I know we have with deployments. So like we'll go away and we'll feel urges for our wives, and like what do we do about that? Is we're fasting. We're being told to fast, unfortunately, but we're in prayer about it, that God would protect us. Could that be an example? I mean, we're fasting.
I mean, that's a forced
Right.
thing that you're being put into, but yeah, that I think
drives
that.
us to prayer.
I don't think Paul's saying just the only thing to do with your life once you get married is have sex and prayer. Don't bother going out to the field and working anymore. Like, that's not the point.
That's how I read it.
It's specifically aimed at the temptations.
That's your opinion.
It's specifically aimed at the temptations of the devil, because that's how he starts it out. Because of sexual moralities, because you might have lack of self-control, be careful. The devil's going to use that. It's going to come at you. So make sure that you guys are, you're actually giving to one another, the body. No one's being deprived, and you come away for prayer.
Okay, for further discussion.
Okay. But again, it's not negating that sort of thing. I think that's fine. But I just don't think that's what he's talking about here.
I'm not even. I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
The way I've always read it is that you would stop having sexual relations for a time. So with that time, energy, and attention, you would devote that would have otherwise been devoted to your wife, to God in prayer.
That is what he's saying, yeah.
Right. And then the time, attention, energy that is then directed to God in prayer. Just like how when we fast from food, we would take that food and ideally give it to others in the covenant community who are in need, right? And then that would come to an end at some point, and then we would resume eating. Then the time of fasting, in which we were devoting that energy and attention to God in prayer, would come to an end, and then that energy and attention would be devoted back to your spouse in the preparation for and the consummation of the sexual act.
I don't know if I want to say that, because I would say the sexual act is worship of God. So I mean, especially in light of Genesis 1 and 2.
I agree with
So I wouldn't be like, hey, now you need to worship God. And I think he's really talking about the temptations and what you need to do to combat the temptation of the devil, which is you're going to need prayer with God, which is what I would actually say is what I was talking about last time with having dinner with Jesus. And you're going to have, or one major help to you is going to be your spouse. I actually think temptations when you get married, by the way, just to help you, a lot of people think, oh, if I get married, I won't be tempted anymore by sex because that'll just all be handled in marriage. I just want to relate to all you young people who are not married. That's not true. That's not what Paul's saying. You actually, I think, will be tempted more, because now you'll experience something, you'll get a dopamine rush from something you didn't have before, and you'll be like, wow, this is an amazing drug. You're going to actually want it more, not less. So if you think, oh, well, I'll get married and I won't be tempted anymore, that's not true. You'll be tempted more once you get married. And so this is how you combat that. When you get married, you're going to be tempted more. And so your spouse is going to help you, and of course prayer having that joy in the presence of God, that's going to help you as well. You're going to need both. Now, if you're single, he talks about it as well. Now, verse 6, he says, now, as a advice, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as myself, but each has his own gift from God, one of this kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, that is, the devil's kind of after them, they should marry. So it's very important to understand here then that ultimately Paul is saying, look, the best thing to do would actually have self-control, if you had self-control. Because, there's a spiritual maturity in having that self-control and whatnot. However, not everybody has that gift. I would say most people don't in the area of sexuality. We are fallen, and we tend to misuse sexuality. It tends to be the thing we misuse. And so because of that, it's probably better to marry. And I think that's what Paul is ultimately saying. So it ends up being a defense in that regard.
How does that work with the creation mandate? Because I've heard people try to use that as an argument
Right.
against all sorts of things. But I recently heard against birth control as saying like, oh well, you can use birth control because marriage is just about sexual temptation. It's not about
Yeah.
or sexual intimacy.
You remember the hermeneutic we talked about last time? Whenever there's a question that comes up, you go back to Genesis 1 and 2 and ask, is this consistent with Genesis 1 and 2 or not? So obviously, just from that standpoint, that would be a no, that would be a false. But in the context, Paul's not saying, hey, it's better overall. What he's actually saying, it's better in terms of your spirituality, that you actually gain control of yourself, that you actually don't need marriage to deal with the sexual temptation. He's not saying, I wish, everybody was just single to be single and no one actually, fulfilled the creation mandate. That's not the point. And so again, but what's helpful is then to look at it and be like, okay, I have a couple interpretations. I can interpret it that way. Is that consistent with Genesis 1 and 2? No, therefore that's the wrong interpretation. So I would just continually employ that hermeneutic. If you missed that whole conversation, it's on YouTube. I think now it is. Yeah, Jesse?
A thought, and then you. I think a lot of dangerous theology has grown up in the past decade or so in evangelical and even in the Reformed world. Jumping off of this as a springboard to say, to emphasize the completeness and the wholeness of the single life, like single seeking a spouse. Like you don't don't feel like there's something missing, like it's a valid calling, and that sort of thing.
Right.
And I do think it's missing the point that Paul is not talking about those who are single and still looking. Paul is talking about someone who is devoted to
ministry, yeah.
and is celibate, and
Right.
is no longer looking.
Right.
And then you have completeness and a calling and a fulfillment of the creation mandate in that regard.
Right.
But someone who is just single and hasn't found a spouse yet cannot be put into that category.
Right.
And so you see in the natural end of both marriage or celibacy as valid options, but not singleness as a valid option, if that makes sense.
Yeah, singleness is never what Scripture calls you to. It calls you from family, be part of a family, to be part of another family. And the only two families you can be a part of are either another actual physical family or the church family by entering ministry. If not, you should get married and join a family. And so Paul's really just saying, hey, yeah, if you're going to devote yourself to God completely, that's great. If not, then get married. He'll talk about later how your interests are divided, but obviously he's not saying, oh, that's bad. He's just saying, it's for a good purpose, but it'd be great if, everybody had like undistracted devotion or whatever, but that's just not the way the Lord has set the world to be.
So when you say devoted to ministry, do you mean specifically as an elder or deacon? How does
No,
that
not necessarily.
So how does that work with like a widow? She's just devoting herself to serving the church.
Right. There's a lot of women like that, right? There's like Anna who's devoting herself to the temple or whatever, and in the history of the church, they were like nuns, which you still have today, but it's a little different. But yeah, so
So is that a valid path for like a young woman to decide to be not a nun, but let's say in a reformed context, whatever that would be?
I would want to know exactly her views of spirituality, because a lot of the things with nuns have to do with a misunderstanding of spirituality as sexless.
Well, and that's why I say, is there some kind of Orthodox Christian perspective of someone choosing that path as a young man?
It could be if you're sacrificing because there's a certain need in ministry. I would be like, okay, well that's valid. But for the most part, the spiritual path of a woman is marriage and childbirth. As Paul says, they'll be saved through childbirth.
Well, and that's why I say we talk about that a lot, and so that's why I'm asking: is it valid for a young woman to say, "Well, I'm going to devote myself to serve the church, and I'm not going to have a family"? Is that valid, or would we say?
It really depends on why.
Okay.
It could be for a good reason, but I would want to know why. I would want to make sure that her understanding of spirituality was not off, and a lot of it is when women do that, and have done it in the church. This idea again of even with men too, right? If you're really devoted to God, you'll not be married, and it's like, okay, again, the same hermeneutic. What is the most spiritual? What is God's design for men and women? Go back to Genesis 1 and 2. For you to remain single. No, that's an anomaly. That's an exception to the rule. That's not the rule. That's not what God wants ultimately with most people.
But it's interesting because a lot of the women who do that, it's like after like 15 years of trying to find a husband and that's failed, so now like, well, now I'm going to devote myself to God. But like that's for Anna and the women who serve at the tent, the entrance of the tent of meeting, and I think probably
Yeah, widows and all that.
like they were dedicated like from like either as a baby or from like a young girl status, right? That they would not be pursuing a spouse. So marriage was never an option. It's not like God's backup plan.
Well, I think Anna was a widow,
Sorry, Anna. Yeah, not Anna.
but her husband I think died at a pretty early age, and then she dedicated her rest of her life.
Years and then, like,
Yeah.
for 80 years, she.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
there's another one. There's another lady whose name is escaping me in scripture. Like
yeah, but yeah, you're right. It's again, these are exceptions and not the rule or whatever. So it can be valid, but I'd want to know the reason. Are there any questions that you guys have? Look, we don't talk about this subject a whole lot. I feel like this is a little bit what we talk about in marriage counseling more. We're just doing it with a big group.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So, when you look at men and women, and you can correct me if any of the presuppositions are wrong, but you tend to hear that men, will have adulterous relationships for sex, and women will have it for emotion, right? Emotional
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah.
Whether that's true or not.
It's not.
Okay. So then
They both have it for both.
Okay, because what I was going to ask is, obviously, if the woman is not demanding some kind of flowers or dating a romantic environment, are there things that the man should be doing or that both parties should be doing to provide an emotional relationship or connection outside of just sex to foster that intimacy that's not just the act itself, but something that's more surrounding?
Yeah, so what I was trying to convey before is I actually think we in our culture think that the sexual relationship is created by the emotions that you have outside of it. What I was trying to convey is I actually think it's created from the actual act itself. Now, if you have a horrible view of what sex should be, that's probably going to be pretty awful. But if you understand that this is a time of intimacy and you falling in love with your spouse, then I think it's much better. And it should be that you guys, then you're talking and you're, like there's a lot of intimacy that goes on.
Like, here's a mechanical act.
Right.
That's gonna
Yeah, your spouse is not a John and you're not a prostitute. And so like there should be a lot of intimacy going on. So yes, I think that's what's done. Ultimately, what does the man do to show you that he's in this covenant? He provides, protects, and shares his marriage bed with you. What does the woman do to tell you that she's in it? She provides her marriage bed for you. And you can say, well, but I make him a sandwich, and it's like he can go to the restaurant and have a sandwich made. Well, I go out and I run chores for him. He can hire someone to go get stuff for him. Again, this is stuff that only you two can do with one another. And so that's where you need to convey to one another that you're all in. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, Barb?
Yeah, when you do obey, it can't just be physical.
Right.
It has to be a joy,
Right.
doesn't it?
Yes.
Joyful.
And worship.
Right.
I really want to get away from the Gnosticism that has been it's pervaded our culture, that sex is bad. And even though we all know it's not, there's still that lingering on, oh, this is kind of a dirty thing. And I want people to realize this is being done in marriage. Again, Genesis 1 and 2, this is the first command of God. The first command of God is he made them male and female and told them to have sex because it's a holy thing. It's a worship thing. The problem is we spend our lives worshiping ourselves and now we can't see it that way. But this is meant to worship God. And so all that needs to be a joyful, worshipful thing to where you're like, I'm doing the best thing I could possibly do right now. There's nothing dirty about this. Is the holiest thing I can do at this moment. And it's the most right thing I could do before God's eyes and my spouse's eyes. I'm fulfilling my covenant that I made. There's nothing better that I actually can do at this moment. If I go watch TV instead of this, I'm actually probably committing idolatry more and doing something wicked. More than this. This moment is better than it. So I want people to think that way about it, and I feel like they just don't. Especially those of us who grew up in like Christian fundamentalism and evangelicalism. We got a lot of bad information about sexuality.
But what if, like, your feelings are hurt? And it's difficult to,
Yeah.
things are unresolved.
I think those are great opportunities. If you think about this correctly, Allison and I used to get in these huge fights toward the beginning of our marriage. And I would go out. Yeah, I know. It's crazy. Was that Allison who said it?
She used to be really feisty.
I would leave the house and get myself something to eat, and I would bring her back food. Even though I was ticked off at her. What I realized is that in that moment, even though I was super mad at her, is that I made a covenant with this woman, and I have an obligation to fulfill this even when I'm mad. I would argue to you that even when you are mad, you fulfill that obligation. It's an opportunity for you to see even for yourself, am I just in this because of emotion, or am I in it because I made a covenant? And I'm going to fulfill that covenant even when I'm mad. And lo and behold, if you actually get together, I guarantee whatever you're mad about might actually be worked out in that whole process there. Because you can talk about it. You might even talk about it beforehand, and you have, the what people call make-up sex or whatever. But ultimately, you understand, like, the worst thing you could do is be like, I'm mad at you, so I'm going to cut you off physically from me. That's going to break your relationship further.
I think if you bring her Taco Bell home, you might actually be bringing
My wife likes Taco Bell, so it's basically an aphrodisiac.
here, I got you a stomach. Here's Taco Bell. I know we fought, but now you can have diarrhea.
It gets back to what I was talking about, breakfast.
Yeah, you're right, exactly right.
Start out with
Yeah.
breakfast, we're gonna have a breakfast.
There you go, right there. It's an inclusio. It just encapsulates everything.
You ate Chipotle, and you brought home Taco Bell.
All right, is there any burning question? I do want to mention he does say it's better to do this than to burn. Now, in the context, it probably is talking about burning with, desire. However, it is ambiguous. The idea might kind of also be that you are, in fact, saving your spouse when you engage correctly in the covenant you made with them from going off into what he read before about becoming a sexually immoral person. If you save them from becoming a sexually immoral person, if you actually contribute to their sanctification, it could be that you actually are helping them be a Christian. So again, just remember, like if anything, the covenant is to be surrounded in love for one another. Love your spouse and care about what happens to them in terms of their temptations and whatnot. Jesse, you want to end in prayer?
Dear Lord, thank you for your gift of marriage to us. Thank you for loving us up front and calling us into our marriages and giving us this the great gift of protection and enjoyment of our spouses. Please let our marriages be fruitful. Please protect our marriages. Please help us to deal with and confess and kill sexual sin in our marriages. Yes, in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thanks, guys.